This is our 14th week being together. We have one more week after this. And let me tell you how much I've loved your midterms. And I know it took me, 2 months to actually get through them. I think I just finished Jessica's on the way here. Yeah, you're like, finally. I loved them. I mean, do you guys love the midterms? Yeah. Finding those people, asking the questions. Like, you found 2 pastors that are on staff here within this building or the next building over, right, and would have had no idea that they were just a wealth of missions information and all that stuff. So yeah, it's good stuff. We'll get the rest of them. I think I got 2 more to correct, and then we'll get the midterms coming in. I mean, the finals in about a week from now. So tonight we want to talk about language learning. We want to talk about leadership and reentry. And so our guest tonight is Jeff Johnson, not to be confused with Pastor Jeff Johnson from Downey, right? Right. It's not always a thing because it's a common name. And I forgot. Bonnie. Jeff and Bonnie. And they've served in a group of different countries. And so why don't you go ahead and just give us a little background on who you guys are and maybe how you got started in missions. And so let me just ask you the first question that we have here, responding to the call. So maybe just a little testimony of getting saved, maybe getting married, and then responding to the call so we can get to know you.
Sounds great. Well, hello everybody. Glad to be here. I actually got saved at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. My dad still lives in the same house I grew up in Corona del Mar. So, blessing to be back. Thanks for having us. And I've taught, I think, 6 other Calvary Chapel Bible colleges. So now I got number 7, I think. So glad to be here.
Are these in America, or are they?
They're all over. All over. I don't think any of them are in America.
Yeah. All right, so this is your first one.
This is our first.
This is it.
Yeah. Whoa.
Welcome back. Yeah, welcome back. Yeah. So getting saved and coming from the drug background, I always wanted just to serve the Lord full time and wanted to do ministry, whatever that looked like. And I went to Mexico a lot on surf trips, and I think those little trips kind of put something in my heart to reach other people. And then I was in college thinking about missions and got invited to go to Guatemala on a mission trip. And as soon as I heard it, I was like, I want to go. And I did. I went. I got sicker than a dog. So I'm this skinny college student, and I go there and I get so sick I lose 15 pounds in 3 days. And I learned a lot. I came home, said that was a really good experience, but I'll never do that again. Ha ha ha. Don't ever say that. And that summer I came back, and when I went back to school, I got to share in front of my congregation up in San Luis Obispo where I went to college. And somebody was sitting in the audience.
And I was sitting there and said, ooh, I want to be a missionary. That
That's
guy,
right.
like, he went to, Guatemala. That's pretty cool. So I thought he was kind of fun, right?
But she really did want to be a missionary.
I did. I started.
Tell them what you thought you were going to be.
Yeah, so I went to Cape and Ray Bible School in England. And halfway through, I was like, that's what I want to be as a missionary. I wanted to be a school teacher, but I figured I could be a missionary school teacher.
Single missionary.
And I thought, oh yeah, I'm not getting married. I'll be single, so I'll be a single missionary school teacher, at least till I'm 26. That seemed like forever.
Right.
So, but then the first week I go to college and I see him, I'm like, woo, I could do that.
Yeah. It was a package deal.
It came together, yeah.
Right.
But that passion for doing missions always was there, so we wanted, when we got married, we wanted to do missions. We told my parents knew this, so they didn't want us to be missionaries. They wanted us to live here and have grandkids and see them. So they bought us a brand new house in Irvine, right in Woodbridge, with all the pools and the lakes and the big wheel golf or course and all these things. But we still ended up moving to Papua New Guinea. For 2 years, working with Wycliffe Bible translators. I'd worked with youth ministry for years and years, and was a youth pastor in Irvine for 4.5 years. So we ended up doing youth ministry with missionary kids in Papua New Guinea. There were about 220 kids, 7th through 12th grade, from 17 different countries. They all spoke English. A lot of them spoke other languages too. So we did that for 2 years. We brought our 15-month-old son with us, and then had another one there. And we felt called there. You talk about calling.
Well, yeah, just know, we all read Peace Child in a previous class, so
Okay.
we kind of got familiar with that
Yeah.
Papua New Guinea area. Yeah.
Well, Peace Child was actually on the other side of the border in Irian Jaya.
But it's the same island, so to us,
Same
it's just one
island.
big,
Yeah. And we actually got over there and saw Don's house. And
Oh, nice.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that was pretty cool. So when we went to Papua New Guinea, it was more about what we were going to do, though, than actually which country we went to. And to this day, I mean, every country I go to, I love it. And so, and we're very involved right now in Mexico. We know Mexico, and we understand how it works. And so that's kind of our passion right now is Mexico, but we loved Papua New Guinea. We actually lived in Germany, Israel, Spain, Uganda, and in Mexico the longest. And they were all awesome places. We just felt like God was just saying go, and the place we actually went wasn't as important as what we did when we got there for us. So that's how that worked
Yeah,
out.
tell us more about that, because normally somebody feels a call to a place, and then they get to that place, and then the calling kind of unfolds. You felt the call to a certain thing you wanted to do, and then you found the place to do it. Is that how we're understanding it?
Well, for the original time, I was a youth pastor, and you don't really become a youth pastor in most mission situations. So we were trying to figure out what was a good fit. We'd worked with Wycliffe Bible translators on short-term trips. We'd taken high school kids to Ecuador and to Peru and to Mexico for like a month each time we went. And we just knew every time we went, it's like we loved this more and more, and we loved taking the kids, but we knew we wanted to jump in with both feet and stay. So we investigated through Wycliffe, and because they had this large center where they do all the Bible translation for over 800 languages in Papua New Guinea, that they had this need for a youth director. And it's like, wow, I can do that. And what worked out really well for us while we were there, which isn't directly answering your question, but with this missions heart that we had, we didn't want to just babysit a bunch of missionary kids. And so they started getting excited about their own faith. And we trained the kids to do evangelism and discipleship with the Papua New Guineans. And they got so excited. And we saw, just the last 6 months we were there, we probably saw over 500 Papua New Guineans get saved. It was really cool.
Now, is this in a large city?
No.
Where you would have this base?
No, it was out.
'Cause we think of it as only Don Richardson's book, right?
Yeah.
Rivers and dugout canoes and.
Well, we didn't have any dugout canoes. We did have a river, and we'd float down it in little rubber inner tubes and hit our backsides on the rocks once in a while.
Right.
No, where we lived was like the closest city was 7 miles away, and it had 7,000 people in it.
Oh.
So we lived
Okay.
kind of in this remote area, and the biggest city was 2 hours away, and that was like 18,000 people. And then there was another one 4 hours away with like 50,000 people. So it's a very rural area.
Very.
And we, you asked another part of that question.
I was just saying that you felt like, I know what I want to do. I want to do missions.
Okay,
And these
that
are my
part.
skills. How do these all fit
Yeah.
together?
So we were looking at, I didn't want to go and crunch numbers in an office, even though I could do that. I wanted to teach the word, but I didn't want to take jobs away from nationals if they were supposed to be doing certain things. So working with the missionary kids and then helping them catch the vision to do ministry was a blessing. It also kept a lot of their parents on the mission field, because if their kids are going crazy, which some of them were, and some of them were getting ready to either leave or had already left because their kids were just going berserk. And so we just felt like, let's find a place where we can do what we really want to do. And we weren't exactly sure what that was, but when that opportunity came up, just the light bulb went on. Said,
So you knew people from Wycliffe,
Yeah,
and you were interacting with them, and then the door opened for that.
yeah. That's
Okay.
when their office was down the street in Huntington Beach.
Right, right.
So, yeah, and to me, the more adventurous, the better. So Papua New Guinea,
Yeah.
it's like, wow, that'd be great.
So 200 languages?
800,
800 on the island.
yeah, on that half of the island.
Yeah, right.
800 more on the other half.
200 high school kids.
Wow. And all those languages going on. So your evangelism was in what language?
It was mostly in Melanesian Pidgin.
All right.
Yeah.
Which the kids learned.
Okay. Did you guys learn that?
I
A
learned
little bit.
Little bits and pieces, yeah.
I
'cause
learned
two
a fair
years is
amount,
pretty short,
and
yeah.
Bonnie was home with kids
Right.
a lot. So.
Having babies.
Yeah. So how old were your kids during that season?
15 months. Our son was when we got there,
All right.
and then we had a baby over there.
Who was 15 months when we came home.
Yeah.
Right, so 2 years.
2 years.
All right, so just a question, this would be just for this first country. What were the first few months like? We wanted to talk about, this class is preparing to go. You have all these expectations and you think it's going to be a certain way. And you're working with a very established organization, so I'm sure they have staff and they have things put in place versus just getting dropped into something and being a pioneer missionary. What were those first few months like for you?
Well, they had an orientation for 3 weeks when we got there.
Okay.
And, you know, growing up in Orange County, and, you know, I'd been working at a part-time job, I was going to seminary at Talbot, and I was a half-time youth pastor, which was still 40 hours a week. You know, how do you do that? Anyhow, but I loved it. And so we were just like going crazy. We get there for this orientation the first week, and they say, oh, we postponed it a week. And I'm like, I could have done so many other things, even though we were excited to be there. And so this whole, you know, crazy, you know, mentality just had to come to a stop and realize, you know, I'm not in Kansas anymore.
Right.
And one of the guys, an Australian bloke,
Right.
told us that first week, and we actually quoted this to each other this morning for a friend of ours. He said, wherever you are, be there. He said, a lot of you are going to, you know, it's kind of like Paul says in Philippians 3, forgetting what lies behind, pressing on, you know, you're always thinking, what was it like at your church back home? And what was it like at your grocery store? And how did people do this and do that? And what were the roads like? And you know what? You're not there anymore. You can't live in the past. You got to live here and enjoy every minute of it. And we did. We loved it. So we went through orientation. There was language learning in that orientation. Part of that, you mentioned the whole idea of language learning, is it was all auditory. There was no visual at all until the very last day. And then she gave us a bunch of papers and said, you can look at this later if you want. For me, that was really tough. And I think for most people, because most of us are visual learners. And so not to ever see how a word was spelled, you know, once I saw them spelled, I could pronounce it. I couldn't pronounce half the words until I saw them spelled. And fortunately, Pidgin's a very simple language. There's only like 6,000 words in the whole language. And we went back 10, 11 years later, and I was shocked that I could speak just as well as pretty much as I did when I had left.
Right.
Which wasn't great, but I could communicate and understand.
Right. Okay. So with language, that would be our next question. With language, in learning a language, how important is it? Now, of course, you guys were leading international kids, so it was a bit unique. But let's imagine you were called to reach a tribe, right? Or move to a large city in another country. Talk to us about the importance of language, and you can spread from Papua New Guinea to Mexico to Germany, whatever. Talk to us about learning language as a whole and the need for it.
Well, there's no substitute for learning the language. I mean, if you're going to be somewhere for a long time, you need to learn the language. It's funny because in Mexico, there's Americans down there that aren't there as missionaries, and they live there, and they still say hola, because they don't know how to speak Spanish at all, and they don't know what's hola instead of hola, you know? Yeah, it's pretty funny. And so the people, they'll still love you and respect you, but if you speak their language, they know you're trying, they know you care. And the reality is sometimes people here in the States said, well, like, why don't you learn English, you know? Well, it'd be good to learn English. But if you're in their country, you know, why don't we learn their language? So learning, and the people loved our organization in Papua New Guinea because almost everybody spoke Melanesian Pidgin, which was the trade language. Now, again, with 800 other languages, so a lot of people spoke other languages too. But they just knew, hey, we're trying to relate to them on their level instead of trying to make them relate to us on our level. And I know, you know, we were in Uganda, which speaks English, but one of the things they liked, the whole concept, is Bonnie and I, we rode the public transportation everywhere. And we had a car, but we didn't really like using it, and you can't really witness to anybody in the car except each other. So the Papua New Guineans, it really helped endure them to us and us to them.
The Ugandans.
The Ugandans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you learn Bugandan at all? Because you were in Kampala, weren't you?
Well, I learned a little bit Lugandan.
Okay.
Just a few words, and I'd greet people when I'd go running and stuff like that. But wherever you go, if you can speak their language, I remember we went to this village out right by the Congo, and so I'd always learn the greeting as soon as I go, and I run a lot, so I'd go running and I'd greet people and I'd say their language to them, and some of them would just die laughing.
Well, mostly the little kids, and
Yeah,
he had
of
like
course.
20 little kids following
Following
him.
him, yeah.
I mean, I must mean I'm running pretty slow if
Yeah.
they can keep up with me, right?
And they're calling him Mzungu the whole time, of course, yeah.
How
Which
are
means
you?
white man, right, yeah. Look at the white man go.
So, yeah, but, I mean...
So we had Pastor Brian Kinike in class with us a few weeks ago, talking to us about his church plant, and of course Joe Winkie is a friend and stuff. So, or Joe Kinike now.
Yeah.
So then with language learning, can you disciple if you don't know the language, and not Uganda where English was a trade language for them? It was a British thing. Like in Germany, can you disciple in English in Papua New Guinea? What's the essentialness of learning the language?
Well, it's a great question, because that's what Jesus tells us to do, is go make disciples. He doesn't tell us to make converts or believers, but disciples. So you need to spend time with them. Mm-hmm. So I met my landlord in Germany when we were in Germany. Didn't speak a word of German. I didn't speak a word of, or he didn't speak a word of English. I didn't speak a word of German. And he was on my heart, though. And I mean, most people I knew were church people, but I asked him, and I don't remember even how I asked him this, if we could meet and have a little Bible study. And he said yes. It was interesting because I learned the word in Melanesian Pidgin for prayer comes from German. I didn't know that till I got to Germany. And I told him he was having back surgery, and I was trying to tell him I was going to pray for him, and I heard that word, and I go, oh my gosh, beten, that's the same word to pray,
Right.
But I ended up meeting with him every week for discipleship. But I had to get another German guy that spoke English, and so I was kind of training him, though, how to do discipleship with this other guy, and then I knew I was only there for one semester, and that he could continue the discipleship after I left. So actually, that part worked out really well.
So it's a double discipleship?
Yeah, it was.
Training.
But
training your translator, and then.
But sometimes
discipling
you
them.
don't. Sometimes how do you? What if you don't have a translator?
Right.
I mean, it's great to get somebody else involved. So in Mexico, I actually gathered 3 guys together, and my Spanish was okay, but I wasn't sure how okay it was. And we met every week and spoke Spanish the whole time, and I could do it, And I'm sure my Spanish, well, I know for a fact my Spanish still isn't great, but people understand what I'm saying, and they get it. And so I still feel very close to these guys. One of them's actually moving on the Yucatan Peninsula on the other side of Cancun this next year to plant a church. And I'm already planning to take a group of people. You guys are welcome to come. And we'll go down there for a week and do evangelism and outreach events and help them plant the church, 6, 12 months after they get started.
And he's from Baja California at the moment? All right.
Rosarito.
So just below Tijuana.
Right.
And a couple more minutes down the coast on Baja. All right. So with language learning, what we found just kind of globally is there's 2 ways to tackle it. There's the classroom with the grammar, and all of the different ways to do it with the chalkboard and the whole thing, or the whiteboard. And then there's the on the street or the coffee shop. Which way do you prefer personally, and of course your wife as well? Are you guys different in the way that you prefer to learn it? Or are you the same? How did it play out for you in these different places?
Do you want to say anything about that?
Well, for Spanish, he went down and already knew Spanish,
Right.
and I didn't know anything, just hola. And so I came back. And
Better than hola.
Yeah, came back and took a course that summer because we wanted to see our kids. They were in college and they were home, and at the city college, and that really helped get a foundation. But then I just enjoyed spending time talking with other ladies that spoke Spanish. And so I think that's kind of key. You have to have a friend or somebody to talk to and learn
all
the
the
language.
time.
Yeah, just all the time. Because if you think you can do it in a classroom, it doesn't happen. That you need to be, using it. So.
Right. Now, what about Germany and the other places?
Right. We took a course in Germany, but our Bible college was mostly all the Germans could speak English. So,
And what city were you in Germany?
Siegen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you're with the guys there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I visited, had a
Yeah.
good time with them. That was
Yep.
really nice.
That
Yeah.
was great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were in Siegen.
Yeah, you got to get out of the classroom.
You have to make friends with somebody that speaks the language.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because
So-
one of the concepts is the LAMP, right? Language acquisition made practical. And in the LAMP program, you're taught to go out on the streets and you meet 50 people a day, or 25, however it is, and you learn one word. So let's say I read it as hola, but really it's hola, and the first person just dies laughing that I say it wrong. And then I say it to them, they say it back to me, and we go back and forth, and I find the next person, the next person, the next person, and I travel around the community, and now I've built 25 friendships, and they realize that I'm humble enough to be laughed at and learning their language, and then each day you're adding one more word to it, right? And so some people say that's the only way they can do it. And for example, I was in East Africa working with the MAF pilots, and they're like, we could never do that because the way that we think as pilots, we have to see the whole structure of it. We need to know syntax and grammar and placement of words and all that. We can't just go out and babble like a child on the streets. So with that kind of a context, do you guys prefer classroom or do you prefer coffee shop? Which one do you think is better for you personally?
I prefer the street.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think it's good to have some classroom background. Like I would do programs on the computer.
All right.
I'd learn things on there that maybe I'm not going to get in the street. Or I'd hear a word on a computer, and next thing I know, I'm hearing it like every day. And I didn't realize I even heard that word before. It just didn't make sense, or it was one of those words that you
got lost, yeah.
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 And all of a sudden, it's like, okay, now I get that word. So, to me, a little bit of both is probably the best of both worlds.
All right.
Where you're immersed in a classroom situation, but maybe living with a family. That can be very helpful. Our situation in Mexico is a bilingual church. A lot of the Mexicans, they would want to speak English because they knew some English, and so we didn't speak Spanish nearly all the time. A lot of people spoke English to Bonnie that I didn't even know spoke English because they would speak Spanish to me because they didn't think she knew any. She actually understands a lot. She just doesn't speak as well.
And you find it's easier to understand it than it is to say it.
Exactly.
In almost all languages, isn't it? You pick it up in your own mind.
Yeah,
Although when you speak a language, you can pick and choose the words you're going to say. And when you hear it, you may hear all kinds of stuff. You have no idea what they're saying because it's just in a realm you're not used to.
Right.
So sometimes it's actually easier to speak it for me.
So Papua New Guinea, this pigeon,
Melanesian pigeon.
Melanesian pigeon, was there any computer resources for that? And that was a while ago.
There weren't even computers.
That's why I'm asking. Were there cassette tapes in those days? You remember?
We had cassette tapes back then, and there were none.
No, I don't remember any
No,
cassettes.
it was all just.
There were books, though, with paper.
Okay.
What
And they
did-
have a New Testament.
All right.
But
Yeah.
what they did is they gave us a language helper, a friend,
All right.
as a family. And
So you found somebody.
We had a friend, and
They
would
happened to
get
be our
together.
next door neighbors, too,
So
which
it
was
perfect.
nice.
And they had a baby, so it was perfect, and we could hang out with them.
So, okay, so you had young children, they had young children. It was a perfect
Exactly.
match. All right, talk to us about time. How much time do you feel it takes to enter into a new community and to actually feel like you're able to dialogue? You're not fluent, you're not translating, right? Like scribing out languages, but you can dialogue and you can hold a conversation. You can counsel, because oftentimes that's what it is. You're not teaching from the pulpit yet, because that might be a little too intense. But you can back and forth with them. How long does it take, timing wise?
I would say at least a year to 2 years
Okay.
to really be at that place. As Bonnie said, when I got to Mexico, I already spoke a fair amount of Spanish.
Because of California being so close.
Yeah, and I'd taken classes,
Right.
even at college.
Yeah, you had exposure.
And I'd been on so many little trips, to
But let's
Guatemala.
imagine you had never been to the
Yeah.
country.
Well,
You're
like-
starting from scratch.
Yeah, and New Guinea is such an easy language, you could probably get there faster. But
Okay.
Spanish, yeah, a year to 2 years, I
All
would
right.
think. And if you're fully immersed, not speaking any English ever, you might have a big headache, but you're going to learn obviously a lot quicker.
Yeah.
So I thought I would speak much better after 7 years in Mexico than I do.
So you still feel like you want to grow?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I think
Yes.
the more I learn, the more I realize I need to learn more. I think maybe I thought I knew more Spanish when I moved there than I do now.
So the more you know that you don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you guys get that? Never forget that. I mean, that's the crucial part of it. Bonnie, same for you? Do you feel like
Oh,
2 years
yes.
is enough for you?
No, I need a lot more.
Well, if you were
Okay.
fully immersed,
If I was fully immersed,
Right.
maybe,
Okay.
yes. But we were, I think if you're around anybody that speaks your language, you always tend to go to them because it's comfortable, it's natural, and it's easy. And you don't have to work so hard. And so we were in Rosarito, and my ministry in particular was to the English-speaking woman because that's what they needed at the time.
Okay.
And so I had to go out of my way to make Spanish-speaking friends. But if my ministry was just to them, then yes, it would have gone much quicker. So,
You know,
and then
it's
obviously some people learn languages faster than
faster than others, absolutely. So the pastor's wife, Pastor Mike's wife, Sarah, senior
Sarah,
pastor's wife,
she's-
Sarah, a good friend. We got
Yes.
saved together. And she talked about knowing Spanish perfectly as a bilingual teacher here in America to Mexican American kids and going down there and still making mistakes after 10 years. She used the wrong term. She was referring to a lady in a restaurant, called her a prostitute and not a waitress or something like that. And I'm like, you've been here for 10 years? She's like, I was so shocked. And all the ladies were like, did you just call that lady that? And she's like, you never really totally get the language.
Yeah.
Now, does Mike, your senior pastor, does he still use a translator?
yes.
Because
always.
half your congregation is English speaking.
Exactly.
You have to use a translator at a bilingual church, no
Yeah,
matter what.
Even
Right.
if you speak
But
Spanish.
Sarah's Spanish is 100 times better than Mike's.
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And Mike is a brilliant man, and he himself was a school teacher with degrees,
Yeah.
and he's very studied,
Yeah.
very diligent. And I think it took him at least 5 years until he felt like he could even counsel in Spanish.
Yeah.
I mean, he talked to me
He
about
does
like
fine.
because you talked about it, the headache.
Yeah.
Mike was like, I can't do it, and he's one of the most dedicated, passionate men I've ever met, and he still struggled.
Well, and right when we got there, he was actually going to Ensenada, like
Right.
for these intense courses.
Intense courses,
just to
right.
try and
To
pick
try
it
to
up,
pick-
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and he'd already been there for 5 years.
at least.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah.
Do you guys following that? School teacher, dedicated, and when Mike sets his mind to
And
do
young,
something,
you know,
he
it's
does
not
it.
like an old guy.
Well, I mean,
not like
yeah,
us.
he's older than me, so he's
But
got
this
to
is
be
years ago.
He's got to be 48 now, 40, 49. Yeah,
He was probably in his 30s, though,
yeah,
when he was going back to school just to,
right.
Trying
As,
to nail it.
as a teacher.
yeah.
So, how much time would you recommend a brand new missionary spends in that first year learning language? So let's imagine around the room we got people that want to go to different places. Italy, right? And so she wants to move to Italy. So she's going to learn to speak Italian. How much time would you recommend that she spends in that first year dedicated to language?
I guess my first question would be, how long do you plan to stay there? Because some people, they're going to go somewhere for 2 years, and then that's it. So to me, if you spend as much time as you really need to learn the language, by the time you learn it, you're not going to even know it, and you're going to need to go home. So if you know, and a lot of the places we went was for 1 semester. We were working mainly with Bible college students that spoke English. So it wasn't as critical if we were in Spain for 1 semester or Uganda for 1 semester to learn these languages. But if you're going to be there long term, for that first year, I'd say 50% of the time.
Okay.
Easy.
So 4 hours a day. If we
Yeah.
just think of an 8-hour day,
Yeah.
5 days a week. So you're going to spend 4 hours a day racking your brain trying to figure out this new
4 hours a
sounds
day is
and-
probably 7 days a week because you need to be talking to people all weekend long.
all the time.
You know, en italiano. ¿Hablas en español también?
Yeah.
So you're gonna
Yeah, so at least
it's
she
gonna-
has a little bit of background.
yeah.
Yeah,
right.
you're
Yeah.
going to get it quick.
When we went to
And-
Italy, I couldn't believe that I actually understood Italian. It's like,
Because it was similar to Spanish, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, so Latin based.
yeah.
All right.
Very much so. You'll get it quick.
And I could talk to them in Spanish, and they,
Yeah.
which kind of makes it maybe more confusing. I don't know, but we have a Brazilian friend that picked up Spanish like that.
I think if you know the language, you're going to get to the heart of the people.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you don't know the language, you'll get to the surface. And so it's what kind of ministry do you want to have?
Yeah. Can
wanna
you
get to their
disciple?
heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you actually disciple and
Exactly.
train them?
Exactly.
All right. Now, with learning language, how much of language learning do you think unlocks culture? Because you're trying to learn about their history and the way they think and all of those things. is language and culture connected? I know it is. I'm just
Of course.
looking for some
Yeah,
insight.
it's very connected, and the reality is if you're not even working on learning their language, they're probably not going to even reveal a lot of that stuff to you. Now, obviously, there's just certain things like time, you know, in some cultures. You know, you were wanting to make sure you started right on time. You were reminding me of Germany. I remember this group that I was discipling, I mentioned that to you. The meetings were at my house every week at 7 p.m., and we had to be out of town for whatever reason, and we got back at 6:59, and I'm all excited. I'm going to be here on time for my meeting. They already left. I was not there 5 minutes early. I was late. Now, I found them, unfortunately. In Mexico, if you get invited to a party, and it's, let's say it's 2 o'clock. If you show up at 2 o'clock, there's a good chance the people hosting the party won't even be there, let alone nobody else will be there. If you get there at 3, you'll probably be the first one there. If you get there at 4, a lot of people are showing up. And by then, if you got there on time, which we do still sometimes because we have other commitments or whatever, and we're ready to leave by 4, all these people, as you're leaving, are showing up. Like, they're going, "Where are you going? You know, we came to hang out." It's like, well, I've been here for 2 hours. So there's obviously things, you know, other ways to learn and pick up on cultural things, but there's so many that, you know, part of it, yeah, you're gonna understand so much more with the language and the culture and all those things. I don't know if you have a story that relates to that. But.
Yeah, so we spent our last semester all on culture. Like we did a whole hour or 2 hours on the fun time things and how you're late, you're early, you know. And in Africa we learned the whole where the sun is. Yeah. That was their watch. They didn't have watches.
In Africa, we were meeting people, and as long as, when we said 9 o'clock, as long as you were there at 9:59, it was still 9 o'clock.
Right, and you were in the city.
And we were in Kampala,
where they had clocks
city,
and
and
buses
we were waiting
and all
to
that.
go to an orphanage to go work, and we sat and waited for 59 minutes, and she arrived, and not even a sorry, nothing. It was 9:59 on her. You know, an African.
Still out. It's still 9. Yeah.
And that was after we'd already lived there for 4 or 5 months.
And we were so shocked. We were like, "That sounds so rude. That just sounds."
And this was
horrible.
a group of 5 of us.
You know, and we all had to sit and wait for one person because she was kind of the one going to lead us. We didn't know how to get there. Otherwise, we would have probably left us Americans. You know, being so time oriented. So so you just, you know, culture is so unbelievably different in every area.
And here's a funny thing about Papua New Guinea. So we would go on these outreaches and we'd try to find schools, a lot of schools, and they were out in the sticks somewhere. And so you'd always ask somebody, how far was it? And they would say in Pidgin, Longwe Lik Lik, which means it's far away close. What's that mean? You know? And it's, you had no idea what that meant, and they probably didn't know either, you know? But the answer was almost always the same. It's like, why even bother asking? Because it's going to be long way lik lik, you know? So
you never heard the definition of far away close? It just meant...
It just means...
In my shame and honor culture,
it's down the road.
I don't want to tell you it's too far.
Well, how do you measure?
I don't want to tell you it's too close.
It's 16 trees down the road because they don't know what a kilometer is.
Of course, right.
You know? So get to the 3rd cow and take a right.
Far away close. I like that. I've never heard far away close before. That's awesome.
Long way lik lik.
Yeah. My Africans, I lived in refugee camps and then now South Sudan, and they'd always say, it's somehow what? Just somehow.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'd say it's somehow near,
Yeah.
or it's somehow far. My favorite was one day I said to a guy, well, I'm going to go from here to the city of Kampala. How far is it? And he goes, it's 2 days. I'm like, it's 2 days. It's like 100 miles. How can it be 2 days? He goes, you know, footing. Well, footing? Oh, you're walking. I'm in the car. He goes, I've never driven a car. I don't know what cars are like. It's 2 days. Right? Yeah, and you try to translate that without knowing the language.
Yeah.
And everybody's frustrated. Let's talk about learning language. Have you found that it is not only, well, we know it's productive for somebody to move in. So let's take our sister for an example. She wants to move to a certain place in Italy, or let's just say in Europe. Is it productive for her to go and live with an Italian family and just totally live with them, or should she live with English speakers and then be learning Italian? You follow me on the difference between full immersion into language and culture versus dropping into it and coming out of it, getting into it and coming out of it. So get dry and wet versus just let her dunk in and be soaked all the time. Talk to us about the difference in learning that way.
I would highly recommend living with an Italian family
Okay.
and just jumping in with both
Dunked
feet.
and soaked.
Right. Saturated.
Because you're going to
Do
pick
it.
up all the cultural idioms
Yeah.
too. Oftentimes, if you live even with an American family that's been there 15 years, which we actually have friends that have been there maybe that long, near the Bible college.
Right.
But they're Americans and they actually lived in Hungary, so who knows what other cultural things they're involved in. But yeah, you're going to catch so much more
And
doing it that way. And go ahead.
if you're with a family and they have children, you'll be on their children's level of language maybe, so they'll be able, elementary way to teach you and learn. So that would be really great.
And they're training their kids, as we naturally do, and you're picking it up with the kids.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to be an educated adult and be learning at the level of the 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 6-year-old, depending upon where you're at in your stage.
Yeah.
So would you say that language learning is one of the most humble things that you've ever done? Humbling things?
It's unbelievable for me, and I still have not gotten it. So
Okay.
yes, it's very challenging.
I remember the first time we went to Indonesia, which is where Don Richardson's from.
All right.
And I'd always, in Papua New Guinea, I learned Pidgin, and I'd been to Mexico and Guatemala and a few places, and I'd spoke some Spanish. And we got to Indonesia, I didn't know one word. And they didn't speak nobody spoke a word of English. A lot of places people speak English. And I was just dumbfounded. It's like, I can't say a word. I can't even say hi, or, I learned the greeting and stuff like that eventually, which was very basic and simple, but it's crazy when you can't say anything.
You can't ask anybody, where do I go to the bathroom?
Nothing.
And you don't even use those terms,
You can't
do you?
even say hi.
Right.
And this family, the
Where do
guy
I
I
eat?
discipled, my landlord in Germany, so he had 3 kids, and the youngest one, how old was Flo? Like
Flo was
4 or 5 years old?
Yeah, young.
He asked his dad, how come that guy's so old and doesn't know how to talk? Because I couldn't speak any German, and he thought I was
We'd
just
go
like,
to their house and just they'd have these beautiful tea parties for us, and we couldn't
Right.
really talk to them. It was like, oh, this is so painful.
And from the mouth of a babe,
Yeah.
he just said what it was.
yeah.
Why is
How
that
could you
guy
be
so
that
stupid?
old and be that stupid?
Yeah, basically that's what it is.
And in Uganda they would call you Mzungu Mzee, right? Yeah, the old white man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really stupid way.
Yeah, a friend of mine had his first experience in England, of all places. We're talking about language, and we would assume you go to England, you know how to talk to everybody. And he walks into the house, and he says, he's been traveling, and he's tired, and he says to the person, where is the restroom? Because that's the polite way to ask for the bathroom. And they would say, well, here, and they would show him a room with a bed, like you want to rest, because that's what a restroom is. And he's like, no, I want to go to the bathroom. So they take him into another place, it's a water closet, right? And they say, well, here's a bathtub. And he's like, no, and now he's doing the dance, right? He's got to go. So he's doing the dance, he's like, no, I have to go to the bathroom. And she's like, what are you talking about? See, an American and a British person speaking the same language, nobody knows what each other's saying. And finally she says, oh, you mean the toilet? And the American guy's like, that's the rudest way I've ever heard it put, but yeah, I guess I have to go to the toilet, right? So 2 English people.
And there's 2 other
totally
ways to say that,
Okay.
The loo,
The loo, right, yeah. You got
or the
loo.
ablution block.
Oh, I haven't heard the ablution block. Oh.
And in Papua New Guinea, we had at the school, they just called it the abs. So if you got to go to the abs, that's where you go.
Right.
And
So I get to Uganda and I ask them, where's the bathroom? They look at me like, we don't have running, I'm in a refugee camp way out in the middle of nowhere. We don't have running water. And they said, do you need to go for a short call or a long call? I'm all, what is that? And they said, this area is for short calls and that area is for long calls. I'm like, what are you even talking about? Right? And we're all speaking
your
in
cell
English.
phone, right?
Yeah, that was before cell phones and all of that. Yeah. So with learning language, it's essential. And if you have confusion between English and English, and people can get frustrated and upset and irritated, how do we disciple and love people unless we can truly speak, understand, and be a part of them? So what would you recommend to us if we're moving, let's say, to Mexico? What should be our first step in learning language? With all that you've talked about, how should we start it? And let's imagine we have no one there to show us. There's no other Americans. There's no organization. God just called us to that place, and we show up in that area, and maybe another church, a local church, says, why don't you come and stay here? How would we start doing it?
Well, the first thing I would do, if you could, is start learning Spanish before you even go.
Okay, but let's imagine it's not Mexico. Let's just imagine it's something we can't learn.
There's no language school.
Yeah.
And you don't have a computer and you can't go online. And,
right,
okay.
Yeah, all that stuff, yeah.
Yeah, then, yeah, if there's a family that you can live with,
okay,
and just plug in,
all right.
you know, and just start talking to people, and, you know, you're not going to, like when I was in Indonesia, you don't even know how to ask for the bathroom or the abs or whatever, but you're going to figure it out. You know, and like even Wycliffe, when they go to these languages to translate the Bible, they're going to, you know, it's not Melanesian Pidgin. They're going to a language that has never been written by anybody ever, and so they're like the only white person that's ever learned this language. Nobody's ever taught anybody how to speak this language. They just grow up learning it.
It's an oral culture.
Yeah,
yeah,
completely. And so they have to learn this whole language from the ground up, and that's, you know, so they just in there, and they you know. They'll see something and they'll point to it and say, you know, and they'll hear them say bottle, and then they'll say bottle, you know, and they try, and then they write it down, you know, phonetically or whatever, and they keep it on their list, and then each day they're just trying to increase their vocabulary.
And you remember Don Richardson's first story? He went and he said, what is this? And he used his index finger, and they said, I'll just use the word finger. I don't even know what word they use. Then he pointed at something else, and they kept using the same word. And he's like, what's wrong? And he realized they point with their lips. They would never point with their finger. So they kept saying, your finger, you're doing your finger. And what he meant was bottle, cup, person. And so once he got the lip thing, then he started to get the real, because for weeks he was like, what are they saying to me? Because he didn't know how to point or even ask.
How long were you in Uganda?
4 years.
4 years?
Yeah.
So you remember when they would go, That's a word.
When I come home, I do it. My wife's like, stop. My Sudanese, they go, and they do that. I can't even do it. They pop their throat. It's a deep popping, and I have to figure out how to do it. But yeah, and they show expression
they have longer
through
necks
it.
than you do.
Yeah, they definitely do. Yeah, and now in South Sudan, every one of our tribes is like Papua New Guinea. They're all unique. 30 miles apart, they're a totally unique people group, unique language, no written language at all whatsoever. So do you recommend if somebody, let's go back to Mexico, wants to learn the culture and the language, is it safe for me as a missions pastor to drop off normally the single American girl, because that's normally what they are between 18 and 25 years old, and they're single ladies, drop them off into a Mexican family and just say, live here? Is there a security risk involved in that kind of full immersion?
Well, there could be. I would always have somebody, you know, recommended.
Right. Okay.
That's you know has a good reputation in the church.
Okay.
Or some church or some area there.
So that would be a partially reached area, because if there's nothing else there, because that's the tricky part that we have is we want to learn these things, and how do we do it and where do we do it? And there's so many concerns.
Yeah.
That keep us from really fully engaging.
And if there was more concern, I'd say put 2 single gals in there.
Okay.
You know. So.
Yeah. So I asked the question because when before you guys, I think, were in Mexico, it was a while back. Pastor Mike, their pastor, was living there, I think, for 2 years. So I said, Mike, I've got single girls that want to go in the field, but I'm not going to send them to forever in Africa until they've done 3 months in Mexico. And the girls were like, what? And I said, no, you're going to cross the border. You're going to live with a Spanish family. You're going to speak Spanish, eat Spanish food. You're only going to be completely Mexican. And then if you do well there, you can move to Kenya or Uganda or wherever it was they were going to move to. And to us, it was the test of full immersion. And they came back and said, we hated it going into it. And now we are so excited because we learned that we can do anything. You know, and nobody in the family, and I said to Mike, make sure they're Christians, of course, so there's no weirdness. Right. Make sure they live in a very local area. They don't live behind bars and all that stuff, so you feel like you're part of the community. And make sure they don't speak any English at all whatsoever.
Yeah.
Right. That was the main thing, because there was no fallback. Right. There was no fallback to like, well, no, just say it to me in English and then I'll learn it. It was full immersion.
So we had a unique situation where one of our Ugandan friends wanted to come to Mexico. And by the time she got there, because this was like years in planning, by the time she moved there, we left. So we set her up to live with a Mexican family. Now, the lady does speak some English.
Okay.
And Irene spoke.
This is your Mexican family
Yeah.
spoke some English, okay.
But she still learned, the kids didn't speak that much English at the time. And so she learned a lot of Spanish that way. And it was, interesting to have immersion from a Ugandan living with a Mexican family.
Now, do you found that she did better than a Westerner, being an African?
Oh, yeah.
More able to learn, more humble, more expecting change and expecting that. And do you
Not as high maintenance.
The Americans
All of it, yeah.
are always high maintenance.
always.
Almost.
Our
always.
expectations are
Almost
through the
always.
roof. We expect everything to be perfect, right? Timing, roads, money, weather, people, food, beds, right? Mike and Sarah talked to me about when they first went to Mexico. Sarah had a passion. I don't know if you guys know this. Sarah had a passion to reach Mexicans, but Mike and Sarah are both white European Americans. And Mike's like, I don't think I want to do it. And she goes, no, we're going to go down there. This was back before with Jesse and Lisa, the original team that went out.
them.
And Mike goes, we got to this place and we were going to sleep in somebody's garage. And we're not talking about like a garage like you know of, the painted. This is a dirt floored, barely opened up building. And the guy came out with cotton balls and started stuffing him in the ears and the nose. And Mike and Sarah were like, why are you stuffing cotton balls in our ears and nose? But nobody spoke Spanish. Sarah got a little bit of it. And they said, in the nighttime, the bugs. And what they said is, put the cotton balls here and here, because if not, the bugs will go in and you wake up in the morning and you can't get the bugs out of your ears. Mike's like, you're insane, Sarah. I'm not living here. I'm not moving here, right? I mean, it's true, right? And if the people are living that way, right, we can't live in such a way that we get so sick that we can't function. But we got to realize Mexico's Mexico.
Yeah. I think a good test for how needy the person is that's going is how much baggage they bring.
Okay.
Physical baggage.
Physical baggage, yeah. Luggage, yeah.
If you need 3 giant suitcases to go for a weekend, you're in trouble. So, and it could still work out. You can learn and adapt, but it's like, we go on these, we take groups down all the time for 2 days to a week or whatever. And we try and tell them pack light and all these things, and it's crazy. If we didn't tell them that, I wonder how much they'd bring.
Right. You get a trailer
Oh,
behind the van.
Yeah. They got to rent an extra airplane just
Right.
So.
Any questions, you guys, before we click along with some other stuff? Any thoughts? Language questions? You guys are all silent. Just love it. Yeah, it's taking it in.
So real quick on the language thing. So we were in Israel for 3 months doing the Bible college over there. And we
What
lived
city were you in at that time?
in the old city of Jerusalem.
Oh, in Jerusalem. It was a Jerusalem college. All right.
Yeah. And so the people that ran the hotel were all Palestinians, and they spoke Arabic, also English. But so I would learn some Arabic. And every morning I'd say, Sabah ha'ahir.
Yeah.
And I try not to spit when I
Right,
say
exactly,
it.
yeah.
But like, so the owner of the hotel, the proprietor's daughter, he was pretty old.
Yeah, he was
Probably still is.
70,
Anyhow, she just thought it was so great that I was just saying one word every morning in her language, And
It opened it up, yeah.
It opens up a door of ministry just from your concern and interest in their language. So they light up.
Right.
Just hearing their language.
I don't know.
They almost laugh when they hear me talk. It's like, wow, you do speak.
You shock them, yeah.
And I don't know, there are probably a lot of things involved there, but like in this Bible college, we would do some like M199 stuff in the hotel and stuff, help them out. So they decided they were going to cook a meal for us once a week. And I don't know if they did that for other semesters or not. I probably knew back then. And so we're having this meal, so we'd invite them to come into the meal. We said, we want to thank you with a song. And then we'd sing a Christian song for them. It was right there in the dining hall. And then we'd put the words on our iPad so they could see the words. And a lot of times they'd sing the words, even though they weren't saved and stuff like that. And it was just... So
and you did this in English?
All in English.
Because I'm picturing you trying to do an Arabic song. Yeah.
Well,
they have some good Arabic worship. The Egyptians put out some really good Arabic worship.
Yeah. Well, we went to Arabic church a couple times. I actually spoke at one.
Yeah. That's really fun.
But if it's real Arabic, you can't even read it.
Right.
Little scribbles.
Yeah.
Some of you probably write like that.
So that brings us to our next question is in teaching. Talk to us about teaching. Do you teach at all in Spanish at the moment? Or is it still with the translator?
I definitely teach in Spanish as well. Yeah.
So talk to me about, of course, you have to be there long enough to know language and to know culture. And so now I'm opening up this Bible that was written at least 2,000 years ago, maybe 5, depending upon my passage. And I'm used to translating it or speaking it in English and applying it to an American context, space age, modern, that worldview. So now I'm speaking this word in another context, in a different time in history. Like Uganda, where I was Stone Age. We were like pre-Abraham. You know, we only had mud bricks. We had no roads, no cars, no nothing. And so I'm trying to teach the word in a new language and a new culture and a new history area. How difficult is that? Is there any advice you can give us on learning language in the sense of how to teach the word? Because discipling, even if you're going through one scripture, you're still teaching the word. So maybe not from the pulpit, but in a coffee shop.
That's a really good question, and I'm not sure the best way to answer that. The language, first of all, what I love about Scripture is if you just are faithful to Scripture, it's going to communicate to people in whatever language you use. Mm-hmm. I remember the first getting asked to teach at a church retreat in Austria, and I'd never been to Austria. I was in Germany at the time. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, this is what I feel like God wants me to teach, but I don't know how to relate to these people.
And this is in German, because the Austrians speak German?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was translated.
Was it translated, or did they understand English? I can't remember.
It was at the castle.
But all that's to say is the key is being faithful to Scripture and letting God deal with some of those things. But obviously, the more you can understand their culture, you know, if you can walk in their shoes or their moccasins or their chanclas or whatever it is, you know, you can understand where they're coming from and make appropriate illustrations and applications. Just like Jesus, you know, he talked about fig trees all the time because they grow out of the cracks on the sidewalks in Israel, you know, and so they can relate to those things. But you go to Papua New Guinea, and if you're in the Stone Age and you're talking about cars and jets and all those things, and people are going, what's that, you know?
But also I was thinking, like in Papua New Guinea, to know the culture and not asking Jesus in your heart, but asking Jesus into your stomach.
Right.
And so, you know, it's just a whole nother idea of learning the culture and knowing how to teach it. And a lot of the scriptures are timeless, but a lot of them you need to understand relating to their culture.
Right.
So.
Yeah, you do. You ask Jesus into your stomach.
Yeah, in Peace Child, he talked about the liver for the Sawi. They said, your God makes my liver quiver. Not my heart, not my mind, my liver. And these guys were cannibals, so they were used to understanding the anatomy, which really tripped me out when I thought about it. So in teaching, I was in Germany, and we did the youth retreat for the Ziegen, Calvary Ziegen Church. We did it in Bavaria, which is on the Austria-Germany border, and I taught the word from an African perspective to a group of Germans through English-German translation, and the Holy Spirit moved. It was amazing. Because I was coming out of Africa, so I thought African, but it was the same, like you said, it's timeless. It was timeless text. And when I was teaching in Uganda with Sudanese, they would laugh at me when I would try to talk to them about farming analogies, because of course that's all they do. And I'm trying to explain it, and they're like, you don't have a clue what you're talking about.
Your fingernails ever been dirty, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, they're like, you're talking about sowing and reaping, and you don't even know what this means. Because I'm trying to read a book to explain to a group of guys that do this every day what this means. They said, just read it to us, right? But when we got to Romans, they needed me to explain it to them because that was a European or a Western way to think, right? Very Greek in its mentality versus very Hebrew.
Yes.
So in learning language, do you recommend that we would get a parallel Bible if it's possible, right? Like for some of us, we were speaking Acholi is the language we use in northern Uganda, which is Luo. It travels between Uganda and Kenya. And so we got a Luo Bible, which only had 500 words total in the entire Bible. I mean, 500 words in the vocabulary versus I think English is 10,000 when you're comparing them. Either way.
I think 20 maybe.
Yeah, either way, the English Bible was filled with vocabulary. And the Luo Bible kept repeating itself over and over. So we were trying to compare, if we're going to teach this, even if I speak this language, how do the translators translate it? Do you ever use like an English-Spanish parallel maybe
Yeah.
in Mexico? Talk to us about how that works.
Well, you know, if you're really learning the language, it's good to actually read the word in the language that you're learning. But again, if it's not your heart language, you need to read it in English as well. Because even though you want to learn it and stuff, it's like if you just spoke to them in English, they're not going to quite get it as well as they would in Spanish. So, but you need to bridge that gap in your own spiritual life, and then using that. When you know, because our church was bilingual, all the words for the songs would be in English on the screen, and then you'd have it in Spanish, and then you'd have it in English and Spanish. So you can learn more of the language that way. And again, everything doesn't translate directly.
Absolutely.
And especially songs. There'll be verses of a song that they just translated away so it would sing better, but they aren't even close to the same words. But oftentimes when it's not just more singable, but it also makes more sense to them, you know.
Yeah, and tell us about translating the Psalms being written by a man 3,000 years ago in a Hebrew, world of the Hebrew mentality. And the only thing I found that they translate the same is hallelujah. Right? In every language, hallelujah is hallelujah. Have you guys found that?
Yeah.
Right, it's across the board. It's the only word, amen and hallelujah. And they might say amen or something else. But Jesus becomes Yesu or something else. Like in Asia, Jesus was spelled with a Y and not even a J. And it was all weird. But hallelujah seemed to be the same. That was my little distraction there. How do you find that you would translate like the Psalms, right, into another language? Or are they literally translated? Is it this word for that word? Or is it restructured? Because you're talking about helping people learn to worship. And that's another thing that we have in missions that I don't even know of, and there could be one out there, an actual missionary that helps people translate things into worship songs. Like when you're working with a brand new unreached tribe, and they've never had a Christian song or know anything about, and working with the Psalms in the Old Testament. Do you have any insight on Hebrew words translating into Spanish versus English?
Not really.
Okay, so I'm just blowing your mind.
Not
All right,
really.
that's cool. No worries. No, I told them it'd just be a casual. We're just going to kick around some ideas. With teaching the word, we were working with the Luo language in Uganda, and we were working with a passage where Paul said, "May the grace, mercy, and peace," or something, "of Jesus be with you." So we would say, and being Calvary, we're going to camp on each word, right?
Yep.
What's grace? Grace is unmerited favor. And then what's peace, right? And what's mercy? In Luo, it was good, good, good. There were no other ways to say it. God is good, good, good. And so they said the same thing 3 times. So you spend your entire morning creating this huge message to develop grace, mercy, and peace. And to them, it was just good. Do you run into that with teaching? And I'm thinking about like learning a language. Like, how do we work around that stuff? It's so confusing.
And especially if you don't know about it ahead of time.
Ahead of time, right?
So oftentimes when I would talk about purity, I would use an illustration where I would get some good soil for a plant and talk about all the nutrients and how healthy it was to help things to grow and mature and hopefully bear fruit. But if you take that same good, healthy soil and you throw it on the living room floor, it just becomes dirt. But the word in Spanish is basically the same word for soil as it is for dirt.
Okay.
And it just doesn't,
Illustration
they get the
doesn't-
idea, because you can,
There's a visual.
you can explain
Yeah.
it, but yeah,
It doesn't cut it.
so if you know that ahead of time, you can kind of make sure you explain the analogy
Right.
better.
So when talking about learning language, 'cause that's where we're at, where do you think, when do you think, timing-wise, should a person expect to be able to begin to disciple and to teach in that early stage? Because if it takes me 2 years to really start to grasp a language, and I want to do a discipleship, when do I think that discipleship is going to start happening? And I'm talking about none of their language, they know none of yours. You follow me on that?
Yeah.
I think you're discipling the language learner as
Okay.
you go along. And it's not very formal, but
Right.
they're helping you, you're helping them, and you're pouring and sharing your life. So it starts from the very beginning,
Okay.
just with language learning.
Just little bits at a
Just
time.
little bits, yeah. But I mean, if you want to do a formal teaching, you have to feel pretty confident.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think
yeah.
you need to be completely proficient, for sure. I think you get to a certain place, and I would say probably after a year, I would think you could do this, because again, it's not just what you say. Hopefully your lives are interchanging, you're meshing with each other, and they see your lifestyle, you see their lifestyle, and you can encourage them in certain basic things, and you don't need to go into deep, heavy theological issues at that point. You can't.
Right, you can't.
So,
It'd be absurd to think so.
But again, if this is a fairly new believer, there's basic things, and make sure before you meet, you study those words and figure them out and write them down, and and get your point across.
So finding another local Christian is essential to really go through those words. Yeah, the problem is
or on the computer, and you can.
Yeah, I guess so nowadays. When I was living in Uganda, we didn't have internet, and we didn't have cell phones, and so it was like you were on your own. If somebody didn't come by and translate for you, and the only Bible we had was translated 20 years earlier, and it literally had 500 words total in it. Yeah, we're totally confused. Okay, so talk to us about leadership then. As you're thinking about leading somebody cross-culturally and in another language, when do you think you're at a point where you can truly lead? Or maybe, like you said with the language, you might lead a little now and a lot more later. Because one of the roles that the missionary has is to be a leader, but they go in as a learner. So when does that average crossover take place from you're more of a learner to more of a leader? When does that start to happen in that missionary life?
Sometimes I'm not sure I can even do that in English, let alone Spanish. Right. It's one of those things where I think you just got to throw it out there, and see if it sticks on the wall when you throw it, type thing. Or the spaghetti on the ceiling type deal. Because some people are going to catch on to things even in your inabilities, and other people, even if you feel like, wow, I just discipled 3 guys and you're not getting it, what's going on, So I think you just give it your best shot and you hope it works out. I know I helped teaching the church planting class that we do in Rosarito, and I listen to the guys every class. Everybody has to give a 15 to 17 minute sermon, and a lot of guys didn't know enough Spanish, so I would listen to these sermons in Spanish. And did I catch everything they said? No, but I caught enough, and especially since I knew the text, what they were teaching from, and then I'd hear 3 guys teach on the exact same text, but I knew enough to be able to help them and guide them and give them some points and things like that. But it's definitely a challenge. But I think you just, again, as the Lord's leading, if there's somebody better maybe to do it, you let them do it. But sometimes you're the only one there.
Right.
And see how it works. It's taking those steps of faith and trusting that God's going to help them understand even the things that you're not even able to communicate the way you really want to.
Right.
So I think a lot more, there's a saying I love, is more is caught than taught. And in discipleship, I think that's just very true. But you still need to be able to communicate,
Right.
Faith comes by hearing, hearing by the word of God. You still need the words.
Yeah.
I think that as American missionaries going out, every culture looks to you as like king and queen. It's just like, oh Mzungu, oh white one, oh rich one, that means. And so you're already put on a pedestal as a leader. So whether you know the language or not, they're looking at you, they're watching you, So you got to teach by good action and by good, just, you got to know everybody's watching you, and looking at you as their leader. So as quickly as you can get in and do a lot of that teaching by using your words and sharing, but they are watching you.
Reminds me of the story that a missionary that was in a primitive village, maybe you've shared this one before, and he was wearing his watch. And before he'd do anything, he'd always look at his watch. And finally, he felt like he was at a place where he could tell the people that he was working with about his God. And they said, "Oh, we already know about your God. He's on your wrist." Because you look at him before you do anything. It's like, you're praying to him or whatever. So they thought this was his God.
I've never heard it, but it's awesome. Thank you for that one. The next semester we'll get that. So with cross-cultural teaching and cross-cultural discipleship, let's imagine, and we're really pushing people to, if the Lord's leading, of course, we don't want to be legalistic about anything, but go to places where there isn't anybody else. So you're going to those areas where there is no one else to turn to. You want to raise up a ministry team. When do you feel like you have enough of the language to deal with inter-team conflict? And as we know, the greatest problem with ministry is the people working together to do the ministry. So you've got the Spanish speakers here and the English speakers there, and you're trying to be a cross-cultural leader, learning that language, and he says this word and they think he means that word, or he didn't, that kind of a thing.
So you're thinking a team of nationals.
A team of nationals being raised up by a foreigner, right? And maybe another foreigner coming into it. And we've talked about a lot, like most of the countries we work in, there'll be a British person, an American person, and a South Korean. Because those are the biggest sending, I don't get that many Brazilians and Portuguese speakers, but I get those, and so the Asians always coming at it this way, and the British guy's got this whole other idea, and then they got the American over here, and they're all three trying to learn to speak whatever other language, and they're trying to get this ministry team together. How do we find that we can resolve these, and oftentimes misunderstandings, because of just simple inadequacy in language? How do we resolve those things?
Well, the first thing when you mention that is, to me, when you send somebody out, you probably don't want to send somebody out in a situation like that alone.
Okay.
And even like our goal for our church planting in Mexico, and we're going to places that are not primitive, but there's not a lot of these places there's
no evangelical activity.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly.
I mean, cities of 1 million people with no born again Christian,
right,
verse by verse
Very
Bible
Catholic.
teaching churches.
Right. Yeah.
And so we want to send out a team of at least 6 adults in each situation.
And these are all Spanish-speaking, normally 3 married.
No, not normally.
Okay.
Usually probably 2 marrieds and 2 singles.
Okay.
Yeah. 2 couples and 2 singles would be a typical team. And, probably a few kids in there.
Or a single mom. We have sent out that.
We've got several single moms that have gone. So,
so you're trying to understand their language and interact with them. I'm talking about like counseling and team unity and
so,
just keeping the unity
but
of the
I'm just
body.
saying, if you've got your team, which obviously you have to work with that whole concept with your own team.
Sure.
That team as a group unit hopefully can lend more observation and insight into the situation that's going on than if you were just trying to do it by yourself.
Right.
Obviously, just the difference between men and women is humongous. And so if my wife is not involved and I'm trying to do this without her, I may just not get it at all. And so having her involved, but having this team to try and help work with the whole concept. And again, I think as far as the whole language learning and understanding culture, you're going to go down a road, and that could take years. Okay. And I think you could be somewhere 10 years and still, really miss. I think Pastor Mike in Mexico, he's been there 14 years now.
That's pushing, yeah.
And I mean, there's still some things that he might not get, but he's got Mexican leadership that he'll talk to Fernando or Jesus or Juan Carlos or somebody and just say, hey, help me figure this out. I don't get it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And in Rosarito, because it's so close to the border, it's very different than in other parts of Mexico.
Like you said, half your church is English speaking.
Well,
let's say a third.
Yeah.
But there's a big group of light-skinned, Western-minded English speakers.
You're right.
Now, how many churches have you guys planted out of the Calvary Rosarito?
Well, there's probably about 14 or so
that
are clicking right now.
That are doing well.
We've sent a few out that no longer exist. And
right, sure. That's part of it.
We're learning.
It's part of it.
I think we're getting better as we go.
So I invited Mike to come and share with us about church planting.
Yeah.
And he said, sorry, I'm church planting, I can't come. So that was a good no.
Yeah.
I was okay with that one.
Yeah.
I told him next time he's got to come for sure. So that's exciting. So you guys in your church, and when I first visited Rosarito, there was the previous pastor, not Jesse, the Mexican American, but the previous American that originally planted it. He was just leaving.
Well, there was somebody before Jesse?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, but we don't talk about it. It was kind of this rough moment. And as that American passed.
Well, Mike, you'll never hear Mike even mention Jesse's name.
Yeah.
99% of that church doesn't know there was a Jesse.
Right. So before all of that,
so don't tell them.
Mike and Jesse got down there, and Mike had a room of 7 people, completely disgruntled, upset. He didn't speak any Spanish. They didn't speak any English. And I thought, oh, dear God, how's this going to work out? I mean, honestly, Lord, what's this going to look like?
So this was the original guy.
This was original. That's what he was leaving.
Okay.
Mike was coming in with Jesse. And then Mike and Jesse had some friction and different things happened.
Right.
Jesse left, Mike stayed and just kept working at it. So I'm just painting a picture for you guys that when I first went down there, I thought, this is not going to work. And today,
we went down when there were 8 adults and
right.
about 20 kids.
Yeah, and so what's the number today? You're about 1,000 or something?
Probably over 1,000 adults.
It's pretty big. On a Sunday, a couple services, bilingual, and then many churches being planted as time goes on.
Yeah, and we're sending people out all the time. It's like, get out of this church, man. Go do ministry.
It looked impossible when I first visited. And I was just getting started as a missions pastor. And I had no idea what I was doing. And Mike and I were old friends. And we said, hey, let's take a trip to Mexico, see how this is going to look. Right? Yeah. They were actually in a home then, or this little storefront with like one little room. No children's ministry, crying kids the whole time. Yeah, we had a great time. All right. So before we let you go, talk to us about crucial moments of faith in your life. Throughout all of the times you've been on the mission field, just encourage us as we're concluding our semester. Have there been those moments where you said, in the flesh, I'm done. This is impossible. Looking at task, looking in the mirror, there's no way I can handle this. And Lord, it's your calling, it's your thing. Just some crucial moments of faith that you can encourage us with.
One of them I think about is when we were in Papua New Guinea. I felt like we gave up a lot to move over there. Took the grandkids away from both sets of parents, and
were they angry?
His parents were very angry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to be clear about that. Yeah.
Very.
Just to be clear. Angry. Very possible. Very realistic.
And so we're over there. We're doing all this work, and you feel like, are we really? Am I just babysitting? Some of the kids didn't even care if we were there or not. Mm-hmm. They were just apathetic, typical teenagers that aren't into it. They're not into the God's. And of course, there were some that were like, "Oh, this is so cool! I've got somebody to play with." And I didn't really want to just go and be somebody's toy either. And okay, we can play games or whatever. And so I remember even talking to my advisor, thinking, you know what, I could set up like a youth ministry system or network where you've got a team of 6 people that care about the kids, and they plan different activities. They have youth groups, and they have a retreat and different things that they're going to do. And then I could go and do that and set it up for 6 months and go to different places and set that up. And just, maybe that would be a good thing. And I thought that was actually a good idea. But he didn't like the idea. He said, no, I really want you to stay here. You committed for 2 years. I'd like you to come and stay for 2 years and do this. So I said, okay, let's give it our best shot, And the students had actually planned every year to do a retreat. And they were praying. The year before, there were 15 kids that went or something like that. So we thought we'd be bold and pray for 30 to come. And so we started praying, and I got involved in helping out. And when it came time to do the retreat, 154 kids went on the retreat.
These were all international kids?
Yeah. Which some of them were from Papua New Guinea.
And you found somewhere with a population of 1,000 to house 150 kids?
Well, we found a camp to go to. And, you should have seen the bridge we crossed. There's 2 logs going over a river. Yeah. And it's like, if the tires fall off the logs, I think we let the thing cross without us in it.
Right.
But so we get there, and man, God's Spirit just started falling on people, but it was a weekend retreat. And just when Sunday morning was awesome, and then we started sharing, and then we had to go home. And I'm like, we need more time. How do we do this with more time? And so we planned another one the next year, and we had, instead of like 48 hours, we did like 5 whole days. Or 6 days, whatever, and we found another place. Not quite as many kids could go because it was a longer period of time, and that was kind of the break where a lot of these kids would see their parents, because their parents were out in the bush. But that was a time where this revival, we actually had a revival. You know, the kind you read about in books? I mean, I still don't think I'll ever see one quite like that. Hopefully I will, but it was amazing. I mean, Rosarito's been kind of like revival.
Right.
I mean, we're seeing, now they kind of keep track. 11 people every week profess faith, you know. I mean, I used to go to the concerts here, and we'd see 30, 50 people go forward every week, you know.
Right.
It was pretty awesome. And so this retreat, it was just amazing. We came back, and people were just excited to not only live for Jesus, but to share their faith. And so we trained them in evangelism and started going to prisons and marketplaces and public schools and private schools. And in a place like that, if you want to go, they just say, yeah, when do you want to come, you know? And they'll be right in the middle of a class, and you can show up. You know, we'd plan ahead, but if you didn't plan ahead and you just showed up, they'd like just stop everything, and it was just unbelievable.
So that was your major step of faith?
Yeah.
Was just doing that?
Yeah, and we stayed, you know, it's like God honored staying, and, you know, because it was a tough thing. There was no internet, you know. I mean, we went back 10 years later, and there was internet. We stayed for a month. And my kids, you know, they got involved in the public, you know, private school there and everything. But there was internet. It was so different, you know. I mean, you guys can't even imagine what life would be like without internet. Some of you never, you know, the internet was around when you were born. But it was $5 a minute to make a phone call.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so we never actually made a phone call. Even when our daughter was born, I don't think we made the call, because we had it set up where my parents would call. They could call us for $1 a minute. But it was kind of like, I don't know if you remember the old movies, you know? So they would call a phone number, and then like Mildred would be on the phone, and she would call you and say, hello, you know, somebody's on the line for you. Would you like to take it? You know, it's like, yes, we want to take it. And, you know, a letter, if it was fast, would take 2 weeks. So if you wrote somebody and they wrote you back like the same day, you could exchange something in a month. Right. You know, today, how long does it take to get, you know, something back and forth, even if you're halfway across the world?
Right.
I mean, everybody in Uganda has a cell phone, probably Papua New Guinea. Yeah. What was that?
I just said a minute. It's just
some of my Stone Age tribes that are still naked have phones. They got a machine gun and a phone.
When we were in Africa showing the Jesus film, everybody would come and they just have.
They don't even have electricity, but they got a phone
to plug in, because they're in their hut. They don't have electricity, so all their cell phones were plugged in.
Okay, so one more question before we let you guys go. When you came back, did you deal with re-entry?
Oh yeah.
And I'm going to talk to you guys, and I'm going to talk to the next guy who's coming in after you, and then next week we have another guy. So we're not going to do a ton on re-entry, but just give us those main nuggets so that we get bombarded with the reality that re-entry is oftentimes harder than your first acclimation into your new culture. Tell us about some re-entry moments.
Coming back from Papua New Guinea, I think was harder than going, because you feel like you already know where you're going to. And I got hired as a youth pastor right when I got back at a very affluent church in Orange County. And I'd just come back from a revival in 6 months where all my kids were excited to go out and share their faith. And, you know, it was a huge wake-up call. Didn't go very well.
Did you keep that job for a while?
About 3 months.
Okay.
Yep. And it was,
and that alone made you feel like you were even more disconnected.
Yeah.
Right? I used to be able to keep a job for 10 years, and I'm a dedicated kind of guy.
It was crazy.
3 months, yeah.
It was crazy. Feeling like, you know, when you go somewhere foreign, you expect everything to be new and stuff. And you come back and you think, I got this. I know, you know, how this works. But you're not the same. You know, missionary kids, they have a whole re-entry program for kids that grow up in the mission field, because they're not really American, but they're not really Papua New Guinean. And, you know, I don't know, maybe some of you are MKs.
Call them third culture
Yeah,
kids.
third culture kids, yeah.
But,
Peanut butter kids in a chop suey world. Yeah.
and then, you know, so the last time we were gone 8.5 years in all these different countries. We did come back usually for like 6 weeks during the summer.
Okay.
But when we moved back, I think it's really important to, you know, Neil Perlow has a great book about, you know, building up
re-entry
teams
yeah.
and all that stuff. Our church, you know, actually gave me a copy of that book about 5 years ago, but I don't think any of them read it.
Right.
And so when we got back, you know, we're pretty outgoing. So
from
Mexico,
just recently.
So we moved back 1.5 years ago.
How long did it take until you felt like you belonged again in America?
We're still working on it.
Okay, got that? 1.5 years. They're still working on it. Yeah.
We have a different mindset than our people.
But we felt that way before.
I know. But missionary
this world's
life,
not our home, right?
Missionary life,
I mean, really.
everybody has different values here, and we just are like, we're not fitting in. So
At all. And when you don't fit in home, where do you fit? In heaven or nowhere? So we can either become bitter or better, set free or frustrated.
Yeah. Well, this world's not our home, and so the goal isn't to try and fit in, really. I mean, that's not the goal. The whole reentry thing is, you know, you want to be at a place where you can plug in and do ministry, and continue to focus on the kingdom.
Serve and love and take care of people. Yeah.
And even that's been a challenge.
Yeah.
You know, and there were some reasons for that, you know, transitions at church and things like that.
Right.
But
because nothing was the same when you got home as it was when you left.
No.
New pastor.
Half our church had left, and a whole other new half came, and
new buildings, new things, new leadership,
new technology.
Yeah. Feel like a dinosaur.
Yeah.
Yeah.
New clothing,
everything. Yeah. All right, let's close with prayer. Lord, we just thank you that you've allowed our friends to come and share with us. God, we ask that these won't just be words, Lord, lost in just a classroom, but these will be rooted in our hearts to know you, Jesus, to follow you to the very ends of the earth, to go, Lord, and to make disciples and to do it well. Lord, speak wisdom to us. Help us, Lord. Allow us, Lord, to be all that you desire for us to be as we lay down our lives for you, Lord. Give us the ability to love wherever you place us on this planet. In your name we pray. Amen.
Can I share a couple final thoughts?
Sure, absolutely.
On or off the record. But we've always loved doing the missions work. It was one of the biggest decisions we ever made to come back. And, you know, I always believe you go somewhere because you're called, and you don't leave until you're called to do somewhere else.
Right.
And so we prayed and fasted for 4 months. We didn't actually fast all 4 months.
That's a long time to fast.
But we fasted during those 4 months a lot. And we always thought when we had grandkids, when we went to Germany, we thought that was it, 1 semester, and then it was 8.5 years later when we moved back. So the idea of, and we loved it. We still have our house in Mexico. We go down. We've been back 14 or 15 times in the last 1.5 years, and sometimes for 2 weeks, sometimes just for a weekend. But coming back was a huge decision and really hard. But we love the mission field. We have no regrets about doing it, and we do it again in a heartbeat, you know, and our hearts are still there in a lot of ways. That's partly why we keep going back. We have grandkids now, and a mother and a father that's, you know, who knows how much longer they're around. My mom died actually while we were on the field. Mm-hmm. So there's difficult things for sure, but it's all worth it. Mm-hmm. You know, if you ever do it, you know, I doubt you'll have any regrets. A lot of blessings. Yeah. And you might feel a little weird the rest of your life because you're not quite the same, but, you know, Jesus didn't call us to be like everybody else. He called us to be like him, you know. So.
And heaven's our home.
Exactly.
Our citizenship is in heaven.
Is in heaven.
That's
Missions does it more than anything else.
Yep.
All right, let's take a 10-minute break, and Bill is going to come in and share with us, and he's coming from Europe. and he did a lot of stuff in England and Germany. So we're going to get two different viewpoints on these same topics. All right. Thank you guys for coming in.
Thank you.